"On your knees," I said. "Get on your damn knees, old woman. Now!" The words, sharp and venomous, sliced through the quiet afternoon air. Officer Thorne shoved Eleanor Vance, 78 years of impeccable dignity, against the scorching metal of his police cruiser. The impact sent a jolt through her frail bones. A hot flush of shame and disbelief flooded her face as decades of respectability were publicly shredded outside the imposing facade of Sterling Trust Bank. Her world, once orderly and respected, was tilting into a nightmare. What you are about to witness is not just a story of mistaken identity. It is a story of power, prejudice, and the shocking moment an entire system was brought to its knees by one woman who refused to be broken. If you believe that dignity is not a privilege but a right, prove it. Hit that subscribe button for Beat Stories right now, because this is a journey you will not want to miss. Thorne, his face a mask of bored authority, snatched her handbag. With a flick of his wrist, he violently inverted it, dumping its neatly organized contents onto the hood of the car. Her leather wallet, a string of pearls, her house keys, a small tin of mints, and her smartphone clattered and scraped across the painted metal. His partner, Officer Riggs, a younger man with a cruel twist to his lips, picked up her driver's license. He didn't just look at it. He dropped it onto the gritty pavement and ground it under the heel of his boot, the plastic crunching in protest. "This account has over $3 million in it," Riggs sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "There is no way in hell it belongs to a relic like you." Eleanor's voice, though quiet, was a steel rod of defiance against the storm of their aggression. "I have been a client of this institution since before you were a bad idea in your father's mind." Unfazed, Riggs kicked her desecrated ID card into the gutter, where it came to rest in a puddle of grimy water. "You got some real identification? Or are we going to do this downtown, Grandma?" Eleanor's hand moved instinctively toward her phone, a lifeline in this sudden chaos. Before her fingers could even brush the screen, Thorne slapped her hand away with a force that stung. "I said freeze!" he roared, his spittle flying. But in that moment something shifted in Eleanor Vance's eyes. The fear, the humiliation. It was all there, but beneath it, a new fire was kindled. It wasn't just anger. It was the cold, patient fire of calculation. It was the look of a woman who had weathered storms far greater than these two uniformed bullies. A silent, powerful force was awakening. They saw a frail, elderly woman. They had no idea they were poking a slumbering giant. And they had absolutely no concept of the storm that was about to break over their heads. A storm summoned by a single, silent press of a button. Little did they know whose ears were listening, whose fury was gathering hundreds of miles away, waiting for Eleanor's emergency call. The day had begun with such mundane tranquility. Eleanor parked her impeccably maintained 10-year-old Buick in the sprawling lot of Sterling Trust Bank. She took a moment to check her reflection in the rearview mirror. Pearl earrings, a gift from her late husband, were perfectly placed. Her silk blouse was crisply pressed, her silver hair coiled into an elegant chignon at the nape of her neck. She was the very picture of quiet grace. Today was an important day. She was withdrawing the initial seed money, $50,000, to establish a charitable foundation in her late husband's name, a foundation dedicated to supporting the families of fallen soldiers. Inside the bank, the air was cool and smelled of polished marble and money. Customers came and went, greeted with practiced, efficient courtesy. But when Eleanor stepped up to the counter, the atmosphere subtly changed. The teller, a young man named Leo, with a name tag askew, gave her a glance that was less a greeting and more an assessment. "How can I help you?" he asked, his tone lacking the professional warmth he had just bestowed upon the businessman in front of her. "I would like to withdraw $50,000 from my checking account, please," Eleanor stated clearly. sliding her bank card and her driver's license across the smooth counter. Leo's eyebrows shot up into his hairline. 50,000. He picked up her ID, his eyes darting from the photograph to her face, then back again, his suspicion palpable. "Ma'am, this is a very substantial amount," he said, his voice lowering conspiratorially. "Are you absolutely sure you understand what you're asking for? Are you under any pressure to withdraw these funds?" Eleanor, who had managed a multi-million-dollar corporate budget for 2 decades before her retirement, felt a flicker of annoyance. She had held this account for over 40 years. "Young man, I am quite certain I understand the fundamental concept of a banking transaction. Please, proceed." His suspicion, however, was now a contagion. He whispered urgently to his branch manager, Ms. Jennings, a woman with a severe haircut and arms permanently crossed in a posture of preemptive disapproval. She strode over, her heels clicking an authoritarian rhythm on the marble floor. "There appears to be an issue with your request, Mrs." She paused, glancing at the ID with a disdainful sniff. "Vance." Eleanor stood taller, her back ramrod straight. "And what issue might that be?" "We need to perform additional verification," Ms. Jennings declared, her voice loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "These enhanced security measures are in place to protect our clients, especially people like you." The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the adjacent window, where a young white man in a trendy hoodie was completing a withdrawal of a similar size without a single question, his transaction punctuated by a shared laugh with the teller. "People like me," Eleanor repeated silently. "Elderly. Black. A woman alone." She asked the question aloud, her voice dangerously calm. "People like me?" Ms. Jennings ignored the pointed query, her face a mask of bureaucratic indifference. "You'll need to wait over there." She gestured vaguely toward a hard plastic chair in the corner before disappearing into a back office, taking Eleanor's card and ID with her. Through the large glass window of the manager's office, Eleanor watched a chilling pantomime unfold. Mrs. Jennings was on the phone, speaking animatedly while gesturing toward Eleanor. A bank security guard joined her, his eyes locking onto Eleanor, never wavering. He murmured into his own radio, his gaze still fixed, cold, and accusatory. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, through the bank's plate-glass front window, Eleanor saw the slow, menacing crawl of a police cruiser pulling up to the curb. Her heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She clutched her purse tighter, her knuckles turning white. Inside, nestled in a silk-lined pocket, was the retirement gift from her son. It wasn't a fancy watch or a piece of jewelry. It was a small, discreet security fob, matte black and featureless except for a single, recessed button. It was a direct, encrypted link to his personal security detail. She had always considered it an overly dramatic gesture, a symptom of his protective nature. She never, in her wildest imaginings, thought she would need to use it while making a simple transaction at her own bank. As Officers Thorne and Riggs stepped out of their cruiser, their expressions were already set. They had been briefed. They were responding to a case of suspected elder fraud. And in their minds, they had already decided exactly what kind of woman Eleanor Vance was. It certainly wasn't the rightful owner of a $3 million account. The two officers strode into the bank, their presence instantly sucking the air out of the room. The low hum of conversation ceased. All eyes turned. Ms. Jennings emerged from her office, pointing a triumphant finger directly at Eleanor. "That's her." "Ma'am, could you please step outside with us?" Officer Thorne commanded, his hand gesturing toward the door as if he were shooing away a stray animal. Eleanor remained rooted to the spot. "I have done nothing wrong," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the silent lobby. "I am a customer of this bank, attempting to withdraw my own money." Officer Riggs took a step closer, invading her personal space, his sheer size an act of intimidation. "Look, we can do this the easy way, or we can make a big scene. It's your choice, lady." With every eye in the bank boring into her, Eleanor knew she had no real choice. She turned and walked toward the exit with a dignity she did not feel, her back straight, her head held high, even as her heart hammered against her chest. Once outside in the sweltering heat of the parking lot, away from the prying eyes of the bank's security cameras, their professional facade dissolved completely. "We've been getting a lot of fraud cases lately," Thorne began, positioning himself to block her path back to the bank's entrance. "Scammers targeting elderly accounts, cleaning them out." "I am not a scammer," Eleanor said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "I am withdrawing funds to start a charity in my late husband's name." She began to open her purse, intending to retrieve her passport for secondary identification. Riggs's reaction was instantaneous and explosive. His hand flew to the butt of his service weapon. "Whoa there! Keep your hands where I can see them!" Eleanor froze, her hand hovering over her purse. The absurdity of the situation was staggering. A 78-year-old woman, a pillar of her community, being treated like a violent felon. "I am slowly getting my passport," she enunciated each word, as if speaking to a particularly dense child. Thorne watched her every move with the intensity of a predator. She carefully produced the passport, its dark blue cover and gold eagle, a symbol of her lifelong citizenship. Riggs snatched it from her hand, gave it a cursory glance, and scoffed. "Could be a fake. These crews have some damn good forgeries these days." Eleanor's frustration was beginning to boil over. Decades of patience were wearing thin. "Then call my son. His name is Marcus Vance. He will verify exactly who I am." Thorne let out a short, derisive laugh. Yeah. Everybody's got a son who's going to come down and fix everything. Get in line." Inside the bank, faces were pressed against the glass. Customers and employees alike watched the drama unfold. No one stepped outside. No one intervened. Eleanor saw Leo, the young teller, looking deeply uncomfortable, but he remained silent. She saw Ms. Jennings watching with a smug, vindicated expression. "I have banked here since 1975, Eleanor told the officers, her voice rising slightly. "My late husband and I opened this account with the money he saved from his service in Vietnam." "Right," Riggs sneered. "And I bet you drive a Rolls-Royce too, huh?" A memory surfaced in Eleanor's mind. A conversation with her son just last Christmas. "Mom, the world has changed. Sometimes people won't see your worth until you're forced to show them your power." She hadn't fully understood what he meant then. She understood it now. As the officers turned away from her to radio for backup, their backs momentarily to her, they didn't see her fingers, trembling but determined, dip into her purse. They didn't see her carefully press the small, recessed button on the security fob. They didn't see the silent, encrypted signal as it shot into the sky, a digital scream for help that would bypass 911, local police, and even state authorities, rocketing directly into the nerve center of the United States military. The situation was spiraling, attracting a small crowd of onlookers who kept a safe distance, their smartphones held up to record the spectacle. Officer Thorne, his patience gone, formally demanded Eleanor's purse. "We need to check for false identification documents and any other contraband." Eleanor held it tight against her body. "You have no legal right to search my personal belongings without a warrant or probable cause. Obstruction of justice," Riggs muttered to his partner, a grim smile playing on his lips. "That's all the cause I need." They took the purse from her by force. What happened next was an act of pure, calculated humiliation. Thorne dumped the entire contents onto the blistering hood of the patrol car. Her wallet, a packet of tissues, a tube of lipstick, her reading glasses, the silent security fob, and a small, silver-framed photograph of her son, Marcus, in his full military dress uniform scattered across the hot metal surface. As the framed photo slid toward the edge, Eleanor reached for it, a pained cry escaping her lips. Riggs physically blocked her path. Don't touch anything. The frame tipped over the edge and fell to the pavement, the glass shattering with a sickening crunch. Marcus's smiling face looked up at her from behind a spider web of cracks. "That's my son, my family," she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. "Yeah, well, ID fraud is a real family business these days," Thorne retorted, callously picking through her wallet, pulling out her credit cards, her insurance card, her AARP membership, examining each with exaggerated theatrical scrutiny. Eleanor noticed her own hands were shaking violently. She clasped them together, trying to hide her profound humiliation from her tormentors and the sea of watching eyes. "Social Security cards don't look like this anymore," Riggs declared, holding up her original, perfectly authentic card. "This thing's ancient." "That card was issued to me in 1961, she said, her patience stretched to its absolute breaking point. "Convenient excuse," Riggs sneered, dropping it into a large plastic evidence bag along with all her other belongings, including the security fob. A knot of cold dread tightened in Eleanor's stomach. The emergency call had connected. Her son would have heard everything. The accusations, the shattering glass, the contempt in their voices. He would have heard it all. A third officer, Johnson, arrived on the scene. He took a quick survey, saw his colleagues in control of a situation involving a lone, elderly woman, and deferred to their assessment without a single question. "Ma'am, we're going to have to take you downtown for questioning regarding potential identity theft and financial fraud." Eleanor pulled herself up to her full height, her spine stiffening into a column of pure iron. "I want to speak to my attorney." The officers exchanged amused, incredulous glances. "You have an attorney?" Daniel snickered. "On retainer?" "I do." Eleanor's voice found a new, formidable strength. "And believe me, he is exceptionally good at his job. Have you ever been in a situation where you were judged so completely and unfairly, where your entire life of good character meant absolutely nothing? It's a devastating feeling of helplessness. Tell us your story in the comments below. Your voice deserves to be heard, and by sharing, we remind each other that we are not alone in these struggles." Officer Johnson stepped closer, using his physical presence to intimidate her. "Well, until your exceptionally good lawyer shows up, you'll be coming with us." Eleanor could feel the stares of the onlookers like physical blows. Some were filming, their phones silent witnesses. None of them moved to help. At that moment, Ms. Jennings emerged from the bank, clutching a printout like a trophy. "Her account shows some highly unusual activity," she announced to the officers. "Large quarterly deposits from a source in Arlington, Virginia. Looks like some kind of government payment. Could be pension fraud, too." Riggs's eyebrows shot up. "Washington? That could be federal territory?" Eleanor almost laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. The sheer, breathtaking ignorance of it all. If only they had any idea what the true source of those deposits was. As they prepared to handcuff her, to place cold steel around the wrists of a 78-year-old woman in a bank parking lot, Eleanor spoke, her voice clear and ringing with an authority that made them pause. "Before you proceed with this gross violation of my rights, I suggest you look at one more piece of identification." "What other ID?" Thorne scoffed. "We've already seen your fake driver's license and your phony baloney passport." Eleanor stood tall, her chin lifted. "The one my son insists I carry at all times. It's in the hidden compartment of my wallet." Reluctantly, with an exaggerated sigh, Officer Thorne picked up the wallet from the evidence bag. He fumbled with a small flap in the leather lining and pulled out a single, stiff card. As his eyes scanned the text, every trace of color drained from his face. His cocky, swaggering demeanor vanished, replaced by a look of stark, primal fear. The entire atmosphere in the parking lot shifted in an instant. Thorne stared at the ID card, his mind struggling to process the information. He held it out to Riggs, his hand trembling slightly. Riggs's sneer faltered, his eyes widening in disbelief. Meanwhile, in a secure, soundproofed conference room deep within the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense Marcus Vance was concluding a high-level briefing on global security threats. Suddenly, the door opened without a knock. A colonel from his personal security detail entered, his face grim. "Mr. Secretary, my apologies for the interruption. We have a Code 1 alert. It's the panic button. It's from your mother." Marcus Vance's expression, usually calm and analytical, hardened into something terrifying. He was handed a headset, and as he listened to the live audio feed, his knuckles turned white. He heard his mother's calm, dignified voice. He heard the officer's dismissive, contemptuous tones. He heard the sound of her purse being emptied, the clatter of her life's necessities on a car hood. And then he heard the sickening crunch of shattering glass. He heard everything. His voice, when he spoke, was deceptively calm, a quiet deadliness that promised a terrible reckoning. "Get me the chief of police for Oak Creek, Colorado on a secure line, now." He paused, his eyes like chips of ice. "And have my jet prepared for immediate departure." Back at the Sterling Trust Bank, Eleanor watched the officer's sudden transformation with a grim satisfaction. "This ID says your emergency contact is—" Riggs trailed off, unable to speak the words. "My son," Eleanor finished for him, her voice imbued with a quiet power that resonated in the now silent parking lot. "Marcus Vance." Johnson shook his head, still trying to deny the reality of the situation. That can't be right. You mean, the Secretary of Defense?" "The very same." Eleanor met his terrified gaze. "And I assure you, my son values his family above all else." Thorne fumbled with his radio, stumbling away from the group to make a frantic call. His entire posture had changed from one of aggressive dominance to one of defensive panic. Eleanor used their momentary distraction to take a mental inventory of the damage. Her belongings were scattered and dirty. Her reputation had been publicly assaulted. Her community, the people she had lived among for 50 years, had stood by and watched. And in that moment, she made a silent vow. This would not be brushed under the rug. This would not end with a simple apology. What happened to her today would never, ever happen to anyone else at this bank again. Inside, Ms. Jennings watched the bizarre scene unfold with growing unease. The bank's president appeared at her side, his face a thundercloud. "What in God's name is going on with the police presence out front?" Leo, the young teller, finally found his courage and approached them, his voice trembling. "Sir, her account details, they all check out. I ran the full verification. She's been a premium client for over 40 years. The bank president's face turned a ghastly shade of pale. "And why was I not informed of this immediately?" Leo swallowed hard, glancing at his manager. "Ms. Jennings said she matched a fraud profile." "What profile?" the president demanded, his voice rising to a dangerous growl. Ms. Jennings stammered, She was an elderly woman. She wanted to withdraw a large sum of cash. It seemed suspicious." "Because she's black?" The president finished for her, his voice now a furious roar. Outside, a pale and sweating Officer Thorne returned. His demeanor had undergone a complete and total reversal. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice cracking, "it appears there has been a terrible misunderstanding." Eleanor said nothing. She simply stared at him. The time for excuses and explanations had long since passed. We'll just need to verify this other ID, of course, Riggs added weakly. Of course, you will. Eleanor's voice was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. And while you are doing that, perhaps you can formulate an explanation as to why my perfectly valid passport and driver's license were insufficient until the moment you discovered who my son is. Johnson began hastily gathering her belongings from the hood of the car, handling them with the newfound reverence one might afford religious artifacts. Just then, Thorne's radio crackled to life. The voice that blasted through the speaker was distorted by static, but carried an unmistakable aura of absolute command. Eleanor recognized it instantly. It was Marcus. The officer's face drained of what little color it had left as he listened. Yes, sir. Understood, sir. Right away, sir. The patrol car's flashing lights abruptly shut off. The evidence bag was unsealed. With profuse, fumbling apologies, Eleanor's belongings were returned to her. But it was far, far too late for sorry. 35,000 feet in the air, a military jet carrying the Secretary of Defense banked sharply, changing its course. It was no longer heading back to Washington, D.C. It was heading directly for Oak Creek, Colorado. It was heading for his mother. And it was bringing a day of reckoning that none of these people were remotely prepared to face. News travels at the speed of light in a small town. Within an hour, local news vans, like vultures sensing a kill, began to circle the Sterling Trust Bank. Someone with a smartphone had leaked the story, and the phrase, Secretary of Defense's mother, was a fire starter. Inside the bank, chaos reigned. The branch president was frantically trying to do damage control. Get Mrs. Vance into my office now, give her anything she wants. Coffee, water, my firstborn child. Sandra Jennings protested, still clinging to her shattered justification. But sir, she was trying to withdraw an unusual amount. She is a premium client with over $3 million in liquid assets with this institution, the president hissed, his face inches from hers. And you called the police on her because... Sandra finally faltered. The ugly truth laid bare. She didn't look like she could have that kind of money. The president stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and utter contempt. I will deal with you later. Outside, Officers Thorne and Riggs were receiving increasingly hysterical calls from their superior. Do you have any idea at all, who you have just detained? The police chief's voice boomed through the radio, audible even from a few feet away. The Secretary of Defense himself called this department. The Pentagon called. Eleanor, meanwhile, had calmly taken a seat on a stone bench near the bank's entrance, politely declining all offers to wait inside in a private office. Thank you, but I prefer to remain right here, she told the flustered bank president, where everyone can see what happens next. The officers now hovered nearby, a strange inversion of their earlier roles. They were no longer detaining her. They were now her unwilling, terrified protectors, afraid to leave the scene. Thorne approached her hesitantly, his hat in his hands. Mrs. Vance, we were just doing our jobs. Eleanor looked at him, but her gaze seemed to pass right through him. Your job is to protect and serve all citizens, equally. Riggs joined him, his tone defensive. We had a report of potential fraud. From whom? Eleanor challenged, her voice cutting. From a bank manager who decided, based on nothing but my appearance, that I didn't belong? Neither officer had an answer. More patrol cars began to arrive, not with sirens blaring, but with a funereal slowness. The chief of police himself emerged from the lead car, hastily straightening his uniform before approaching Eleanor with a pained, plastic smile. Mrs. Vance, on behalf of the entire Oak Creek Police Department, I wish to extend my most sincere and profound apologies for this This unfortunate incident. Eleanor's response was measured and devastatingly precise. Unfortunate implies an accident, Chief. What happened here today was a deliberate act of profiling. The Chief's smile faltered. I assure you, we will be conducting a full and thorough internal investigation. So will my son, Eleanor replied evenly. Social media was now ablaze. The partial videos filmed by bystanders had gone viral. The comments poured in, a torrent of outrage. Another case of banking while black. This is what systemic bias looks like. OMG, wait until they find out who her son is. The bank president emerged again, sweat beading on his forehead, his face ashen. Mrs. Vance, please, come inside. We have prepared your withdrawal. Everything is in order. As Eleanor finally stood and walked toward the bank's entrance, a convoy of sleek, black government SUVs with tinted windows pulled silently into the parking lot. The real storm hadn't even begun. The black vehicles formed a silent, intimidating perimeter around the bank entrance. Men and women in dark, severe suits with earpieces emerged, creating a corridor of federal authority that parted the crowd of onlookers and media like the Red Sea. Inside the bank, the branch president was personally counting out Eleanor's $50,000 withdrawal, his hands shaking so badly he had to start over twice. Mrs. Vance, I want to assure you that Sterling Trust values all of our customers, he stammered. This incident is in no way a reflection of our corporate policies. Eleanor accepted the stacks of crisp bills, placing them carefully into her handbag. And yet, she said coolly, it happened in your bank, under your management, on your watch. Ms. Jennings has been removed from customer-facing duties, he offered weakly. Through the blinds of an office, Eleanor could see her gesturing frantically at two people who looked like human resources personnel. Leo, the young teller, approached Eleanor cautiously, his face etched with shame. Mrs. Vance, I am truly deeply sorry. I should have checked your account history before I involved anyone else. I panicked. Eleanor studied his face for a long moment. He was young, clearly frightened, but his apology seemed genuine. Yes, she said simply. You should have. The bank president interjected, desperate to stanch the bleeding. We are, of course, prepared to offer a significant sum as compensation for your emotional distress. I do not want your money, Eleanor interrupted, her voice ringing with clarity. I want systemic, permanent change. A commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. The entire bank fell silent as Secretary of Defense Marcus Vance strode through the doors, flanked by his security detail and several aides carrying briefcases. At 6'4", with a presence forged in war rooms and global negotiations, Marcus commanded the room instantly. His tailored suit and deliberate, powerful movements spoke of a level of authority that made everyone else in the room, from the bank president to the police chief, seem small and insignificant. The police chief scurried forward. Mr. Secretary, we are handling the situation. Are you? Marcus's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a surgeon's scalpel. His eyes, however, were only for his mother. He crossed the lobby in 3 long strides, the hard mask of his professional demeanor melting away to reveal the raw concern of a son. Mom, are you all right? For the first time all day, Eleanor's formidable composure wavered. A tear traced a path down her cheek. She patted his hand reassuringly. I am fine, Marcus, but I can't help but wonder about all the others who might not have been so fortunate. Marcus nodded, then turned to his team. Full investigation, bank policies, police response protocols, individual actions, hiring practices, everything. One of his aides stepped forward, holding a tablet. Sir, we've already done a preliminary search. We found records of 9 similar complaints filed against this specific branch in the past 2 years. The bank president looked as if he were about to faint. Those Those were all resolved through confidential settlements and non-disclosure agreements, the aide finished. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Not anymore. Officers Thorne and Riggs tried to shrink into the wallpaper, but Marcus's gaze found them. Officers, my team will require your badge numbers, service weapons, and your full, unredacted statements. The local news crews outside had been joined by national outlets. The story was now the lead item on every major network. Secretary of Defense's mother profiled, harassed at local bank. As Marcus gently guided his mother towards the exit, he whispered something in her ear that made her smile for the very first time that day. Something about teaching a masterclass in the art of consequences. Just as they were about to leave, the bank's regional director burst through the doors, breathless and panicked, having broken every speed limit to get there. He found his bank lobby transformed into an impromptu federal command center. Department of Justice officials, dispatched by the Attorney General at Marcus's request, were already setting up laptops. Staff were interviewing employees and securing security footage. The bank's internal servers were being audited. The director rushed toward Marcus. "Mr. Secretary, surely this is a matter we can handle. Privately." Marcus looked up from a document he was reviewing. "Like you handled the last 9 incidents? With silence and a payoff?" This wasn't just an incident anymore. It was the unraveling of a conspiracy. The bank's regional director found himself in a nightmare. His meticulously controlled corporate environment had become a federal crime scene. Department of Justice staff moved with quiet, terrifying efficiency, their presence a stark rebuke to the bank's authority. He watched as Ms. Jennings was escorted into a private room for a formal, recorded interview. Her earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by the pale, trembling fear of someone who finally understands the true magnitude of her mistake. Outside, the dynamic had shifted dramatically. The crowd was no longer just curious onlookers. It had become a community gathering. Word had spread about what had happened to Miss Ellie, the beloved retired history teacher who had tutored 3 generations of Oak Creek's children, often for free. Former students, now adults with children of their own, began arriving with hastily made signs. "Justice for Miss Ellie? End banking discrimination now. Sterling Trust, shame on you." The police chief, attempting to perform damage control for the ravenous media, delivered a series of hollow platitudes. This was an isolated incident, an unfortunate misunderstanding. His words were drowned out by a chorus of angry shouts from the crowd. "They did the same thing to my grandfather last year. I have perfect credit, and was denied a small business loan 6 times from this very branch. They treat us like criminals every time we walk in the door." Eleanor watched through the window, her personal humiliation transforming into a powerful, shared sense of purpose. This was no longer just about her. It was about every single person who had been made to feel small, unworthy, and unwelcome by an institution that should have served them. Marcus approached his mother, his expression grim. "The Federal Banking Commission is dispatching a team of auditors. This branch's charter is now under full review." Eleanor nodded slowly. "And the officers?" "Administrative leave, pending a full investigation," Marcus replied, his jaw tight. Interestingly, both of their body cameras experienced a convenient malfunction right before their encounter with you. "Convenient indeed," Eleanor murmured, straightening the pearl necklace that had been a silent witness to her ordeal. "What happens now, Marcus?" "Justice happens now, Mom," he said, checking his watch. "The CEO of Sterling Trust Corporation is on a private jet. His ETA is 20 minutes. The state police commissioner's helicopter lands in 30. The regional director, who had been hovering nearby, overheard this and turned a shade of green. The CEO? Harrison Edwards is coming here? Today?" Marcus gave him a cold, predatory smile. When the mother of a cabinet member is assaulted and humiliated, people tend to clear their schedules. His tone left no room for argument. Eleanor stood, smoothing her skirt, her composure fully restored. Well then, I suppose I should freshen up before I meet the CEO. As she walked toward the restroom, every employee in the bank watched her in stunned silence. The frail, elderly woman they had dismissed, profiled, and handed over to the police just a few hours ago now commanded more power and respect than their highest-ranking executives. In the cool, quiet privacy of the ladies' room, Eleanor leaned against the marble counter and finally allowed herself a single, shuddering breath. The tears that came were not for her own ordeal. They were for the gut-wrenching realization of how many others had suffered the same indignities, or worse, without the terrifying power of a son who could dispatch military jets and federal investigators at a moment's notice. The atmosphere in the bank crackled with a new level of tension as Harrison Edwards, the CEO of Sterling Trust Banking Corporation, strode through the doors. His expensive suit, confident stride, and air of supreme command suggested a man accustomed to shaping worlds, not having his world fall apart. Trailing him was the state police commissioner, a man whose rigid military posture was betrayed by the sheer panic in his eyes. They found Secretary Vance not shouting or making demands, but calmly reviewing a preliminary report with his team. The efficiency of the federal government, when fully mobilized, was a terrifying thing to behold. "Mr. Secretary," Edwards began, extending a hand, "this unfortunate incident—" "It was neither unfortunate nor was it an incident," Marcus interrupted, ignoring the offered hand. "My team has identified 27 similar formally filed complaints across your branches nationwide in the last 18 months alone. God knows how many more were never reported." Edwards faltered, his corporate poise cracking. I was not aware of the specifics." "And that, Mr. Edwards, is precisely the problem," Marcus said, gesturing to a thick stack of files his aides had compiled. "Your bank has a pattern. You settle these cases quietly, bury them under non-disclosure agreements, and you never, ever change the policies or the culture that allows it to happen." At that moment, Eleanor returned, looking as composed and regal as a queen. Edwards immediately turned his attention to her, his expression shifting to one of practiced sympathy. "Mrs. Vance, on behalf of our entire organization, please allow me to offer my deepest, most personal apology for the experience you endured today." Eleanor studied the powerful man before her, her gaze unwavering. "Mr. Edwards, do you have any idea why I was withdrawing that $50,000 today?" The CEO hesitated. I understand it was for a personal family matter." "Partially correct," Eleanor said. She reached into her handbag and retrieved not a weapon, but an elegant, embossed business card. "The General James Vance Foundation, which I am the founder and president of, is establishing a scholarship fund for the children of fallen service members. Today's withdrawal was the first installment." Edwards took the card, his eyes widening in dawning horror as he read the name. Recognition, followed by sheer terror, washed over his features. The General James Vance Foundation was one of the most respected and powerful new philanthropic organizations in the country, with initial assets exceeding $75 million. You're that Eleanor Vance?" His voice was a shocked whisper. "The very same." Eleanor's smile was glacial. "And before my retirement, I was the chief financial officer of Westland Industries for 20 years. The revelation landed in the room with the force of a physical blow. The quiet, elderly woman they had profiled wasn't just the Secretary of Defense's mother. She was a financial titan in her own right, a powerhouse who understood their world better than they did. "I started my career as a bank teller in 1962, Eleanor continued, her voice now commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "I worked my way through night school to get my MBA while raising Marcus alone, after my husband was killed in action. I became the first black female CFO in this state's history. The police commissioner cleared his throat, desperately trying to salvage the situation. Mrs. Vance, I assure you, had our officers known who you were. That is precisely the problem, Commissioner. Eleanor cut him off, her voice sharp as a whip. Respect and dignity should not be dependent on a person's status, their connections, or the name of their son. It is a fundamental human right. Marcus stepped forward, adding another devastating layer to their humiliation. My mother also currently sits on the Federal Reserve's Community Advisory Council. She helped draft some of the very banking regulations that your institution, Mr. Edwards, is required to operate under. The CEO turned visibly pale. And yet, Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous low, she was manhandled, her property destroyed, and she was threatened with arrest in one of your establishments, because your employees and your local police department made a series of disgusting assumptions based on her age and the color of her skin. Eleanor addressed the entire room, her voice carrying the weight of decades of wisdom and hard-won authority. I could have presented my credentials the moment I was challenged. I could have ended this immediately. I chose not to. It was Sandra Jennings, the manager, who asked the question from the edge of the room where she was being detained. Why? Because, Eleanor said, turning to face her directly, no one should ever need a list of impressive titles to be treated with basic human decency. What happened to me today revealed the truth. It revealed how your system treats ordinary, hard-working citizens every single day. An assistant from the DOJ approached Marcus, holding up a tablet. Sir, the preliminary report is compiled. The data shows a clear pattern of systemic discrimination. Edwards tried one last time to regain control. Whatever policy adjustments need to be made. This goes far beyond policy adjustments, Mr. Edwards. Marcus's tone was final. The Department of Justice is hereby opening a formal, nationwide investigation into discriminatory practices at Sterling Trust Bank. The CEO stiffened as if he'd been struck. On what grounds? Violation of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, the Fair Housing Act, and potentially the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Marcus listed each charge deliberately. And that's before we even get to the gross misconduct of the police. The commissioner interjected. The officers were responding with excessive force, clear prejudicial bias, and body cameras that mysteriously malfunctioned for the precise duration of this one specific encounter. Marcus finished for him. Outside, the crowd had grown into a full-blown protest. Community members were now sharing their own stories of mistreatment with the news crews broadcasting live. Eleanor watched it all, her banker's mind coolly calculating the fallout. Your stock will drop at least 15 points by the opening bell tomorrow, Mr. Edwards. The CEO knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that she was absolutely right. As Eleanor prepared to finally leave with her son, she turned to the assembled, terrified leadership of the bank and the police department and delivered one final, devastating revelation. By the way, for the past decade, I have served on your bank's National Board of Directors Selection Committee. Your personal term review is next month, Mr. Edwards. 1 week later, the consequences unfolded with the precise, unstoppable force of falling dominoes. Sterling Trust Bank's stock didn't just drop, it plummeted by 18%, wiping out billions in shareholder value. The board called an emergency session. At the Department of Justice, a task force was officially formed. The initial tip line, set up in the wake of the news, received over 200 new, credible complaints against the bank in the first 48 hours. The investigation had gone national. Eleanor, meanwhile, turned her quiet, comfortable home into a command center for community action. She declined interviews with major news networks, instead granting an exclusive to a local high school journalism student whose own grandmother had faced similar discrimination. This was never about revenge, Eleanor explained calmly to the student. It is, and always has been, about reform. Across town, Officers Thorne and Riggs faced a disciplinary board. The malfunctioning body camera footage from dozens of their prior incidents was recovered by DOJ technicians. It revealed a clear and undeniable pattern of aggressive, biased enforcement against minorities, while white suspects in identical situations were treated with professional courtesy. At Sterling Trust's gleaming corporate headquarters, CEO Harrison Edwards faced the unmitigated fury of his board. This public relations disaster has already cost this company more than any fraud case in its history, one board member roared. Major pension funds are threatening to divest. Edwards' defense was weak. How could I possibly know about every incident at every branch? That is literally your job, Harrison, another countered. And Mrs. Vance isn't just a victim. She helped write the rules of the game you've been so spectacularly failing to play. Ms. Jennings, the branch manager who lit the match, was terminated for cause, escorted from the building with her belongings in a cardboard box. Her career in banking was over. Leo, the young teller, received very different news. His honest and courageous testimony about the branch's unwritten profiles and the pressure from management earned him official whistleblower protection and, surprisingly, a transfer to the Corporate Compliance Division, where his perspective was now seen as invaluable. The DOJ investigation expanded, looping in 3 other national banks whose data showed similar patterns of discriminatory complaints. Regulators announced emergency audits across the entire financial sector. Sterling Trust, in a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding, announced a sweeping plan. New implicit bias training, a complete overhaul of transaction reviews, community accountability panels, and a $50 million fund for underserved communities. It was too little, too late. Class action lawsuits were being filed, and the bank's legal team warned the board to prepare for potential 9-figure settlements. At police headquarters, the commissioner resigned. The new protocols mandated that all calls from financial institutions would require supervisor verification before officers were even dispatched. Eleanor, using her considerable influence on financial boards and regulatory committees, began pushing for industry-wide permanent change. Her proposals were radical and simple. Blind transaction reviews where tellers couldn't see customer demographics, powerful customer advocacy offices within each bank that reported directly to the board, not management, and massive investment in financial literacy programs. The General James Vance Foundation announced its new flagship initiative, a national legal aid service providing free support for victims of financial discrimination. In a quiet meeting with Marcus, Eleanor reviewed the investigation's progress. The systemic issues run even deeper than we thought, Mom, Marcus explained. We found their risk assessment algorithms were coded with the same biases. An identical withdrawal pattern would be flagged as high risk if the account holder was a minority, but not if they were white. Eleanor nodded grimly. Technology that has been embedded with the same prejudice as its creators. Exactly, Marcus said. And we found email chains where executives explicitly discussed managing the complaint data to avoid regulatory scrutiny. Any resistance from the other banks? Eleanor asked. Initially, Marcus said with a thin smile, until we showed them the data we had on them. Now they're tripping over themselves to implement voluntary reforms before we compel them to. The fallout continued. Edwards was forced to resign by his board. Thorne and Riggs were fired and would never work in law enforcement again. The Thompson case, as it came to be known, became required reading in business ethics courses and police academies across the country. And as bank executives everywhere scrambled to review their own vulnerabilities, they discovered a chilling fact. Eleanor Vance, a quiet 78-year-old woman, sat on the advisory boards for the regulatory agencies that oversaw nearly every single one of them. 1 year later, the financial landscape was markedly different. Eleanor Vance's ordeal had been the catalyst for a revolution. The Banking Equality Act, drafted with input from Eleanor herself, passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. It codified many of her proposals into federal law. Anonymous transaction reviews became the industry standard. Mandatory public reporting of all service denials was required. First National Bank, under new progressive leadership, had transformed itself. It became a model for community-centric banking, opening new branches in neighborhoods it had previously ignored. Eleanor now chaired the new Federal Financial Inclusion Commission, a regulatory body with the power to enforce the new laws. Law enforcement had also undergone a seismic shift. New training protocols, centered on de-escalation and equitable response, were implemented nationwide. The General James Vance Foundation's Banking Rights Hotline had helped thousands of people, its caseload decreasing each month as the industry's culture slowly but surely began to change. In a quiet community center, Eleanor personally taught a monthly class on financial literacy to senior citizens, helping them navigate the complexities of modern banking. And in a surprising turn of events, the lead instructor for the bank's new empathy training program was Sandra Jennings. After losing her career, she had dedicated herself to understanding her own biases, and her first-hand account of the cost of prejudice proved to be a powerful and transformative teaching tool. 2 years after that terrible day, Eleanor sat in her local Sterling Trust branch. The space had been completely redesigned. It was open, welcoming, filled with natural light. Her grandson, now in his second year of college, sat with her. His tuition was paid for by the scholarship fund established in his grandfather's name, a fund that now supported 15 other students. A young teller greeted her with a warm, genuine smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Vance. How can we help you today?" The transaction was smooth, professional, and unremarkable. It was exactly as it should be. Later, as she drove home, she passed the very spot in the parking lot where her life had been turned upside down. The memory no longer held a sting. Where her family photo had shattered on the pavement, a small community garden now grew, planted and tended by the bank's employees. At home, she opened her laptop to work on her memoir, the manuscript nearly complete. It was titled, Banking on Dignity. The evening news featured a story about the Vance effect, detailing how inclusive and ethical banking practices were not only morally right, but were proving to be more profitable, expanding loyal customer bases and rebuilding trust. A message buzzed on her phone. It was from her grandson. "Grandma, my sociology professor used your story as a case study in class today. Your required reading." Eleanor smiled, a deep, genuine smile of peace and satisfaction. She remembered something her own mother had told her a lifetime ago. "True power isn't about making people fear you, my child. It's about making systems work justly for everyone." The lesson endured. Dignity was not negotiable. Justice, when pursued with relentless determination, could lead to a reformation that was more powerful than any revenge. And sometimes, the quietest voice, when speaking the truth, could become the loudest roar. Was Eleanor's journey a powerful one? This is more than just a story. It's a testament to the fact that one person's refusal to be broken can reshape the world. Here at Beat Stories, we bring you these true tales of courage and transformation every single week. Stories that inspire, that challenge, and that remind us of the power we all hold. If you believe in the fight for dignity for all, then prove it. Annihilate that like button. Subscribe to Beat Stories for more narratives that prove the human spirit is an unstoppable force. And make sure you turn on notifications because you won't want to miss what we have coming next Thursday. Now, we want to hear from you. Comment below and tell us about a time you stood up against an injustice, big or small. Your voice is a vital part of this community. You've heard the story. Now, what will you do with it? At Beat Stories, we know that listening is the first step, but action is what changes the world. Subscribe, share, speak up. Because the story isn't over. It's just beginning.